Assalamu alaikum. You're watching Views and News, and I'm Faisal Rahman live from our Islamabad studios. Today, we have a very interesting developing story regarding this attack in Iraq. We're talking about this very unfortunate incident, obviously, in which one private US contractor was killed when the embassy of the United States of America in Baghdad was attacked by the public, I would say. But that public technically is considered by the Americans as Iranian backed up militia. Now, one person was killed, a private US contractor as earlier mentioned, and also there were a couple of injuries. But in return, the American president very categorically said that the attack on the US embassy in Baghdad leaves us with no choice. And now the administration is thinking and is saying that Iran has to pay a heavy price for this. Now, this is kind of a threat which the Iranians have received, whereas there was an instant reply from the Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei regarding this also. But unfortunately, definitely we'll be talking about this incident and the kind of New Year which has just started a few hours ago in various parts in USA, almost ending in this part of the world. I still remember the same date, 1st of January 2019, there was this tweet by none other than the US president in which he said that Pakistan has been given around $34 billion and they have done nothing and we should not help them anymore. And I still remember there was a very strong reply from the Pakistani side. But we were all thinking even at that time that what exactly is growing in Trump's mind. So something very interesting, even after 1 year, it isn't Pakistan this time, it is Iran. Now they're threatening Iran that they will be in fact having some very, very serious consequences for this particular attack. But having said that, if you remember, 25 so-called the members of a certain militia group were killed by the Americans in Iraq. And also there was an attack in Syria. So those are justified, but if somebody retaliates, that's not. This is what the name of the game is when we say the might is right. But before we proceed, we'll show you a report which the production team has prepared. Let's watch it and we'll start having our question and answer session right after that.
United States is deploying more troops in Middle East after protesters attacked U.S. embassy in Iraq in response to airstrikes in Iraq and Syria. U.S. President Donald Trump blamed Iran for these attacks on U.S. President Trump warned Iranian leadership that they will be held responsible for any deaths and destruction. Iran will be held fully responsible for lives lost or damage incurred at any of our facilities, Trump tweeted from Florida. They will pay a very big price. This is not a warning. This is a threat. While Trump, U.S. officials and lawmakers placed blame for the protests squarely on Iran. Iran's hardliner leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei denied that the regime was behind the protest in Baghdad, and he condemned the U.S. strikes in Iraq. The American airstrikes on Sunday have resulted in the most serious political crisis in years of United States in Iraq. Protesters have camped in the streets in front of United States Embassy for an open-ended sit-in to pressure the Americans to leave Iraq. Different regimes have been competing for political influence in the aftermath of the battle against the Islamic State, which once ruled large areas of Iraq. This battle of having political influence on Iraq among different regimes is taking toll on the people of Iraq. They are suffering the most in this battle. World needs to recognize this for the sake of the Iraqi people and overall Middle East situation.
That was a report prepared by our producer, Mahnoor. Now, let me introduce you to our panelists. We have with us in our studio on my right is Ambassador Asif Durrani Saab, Senior Diplomat. So, thank you very much. And we have with us Imran Jan Saab, Senior Columnist, Journalist. Thank you very much. And we have with us Dr. Professor Zafar Nawaz Jaspal Saab. He's a Foreign Affairs expert and IR person, Thank you very much, sir. Now, starting off from you, Durrani Saab, an attack on the US Embassy in Baghdad leaves one dead, few people injured, after a very serious attack on certain militias in which, according to the Americans, they've killed 35 members of that militia group. But it is also believed maybe the death toll could really rise. Now, what I'm saying is, sir, the Americans, it seems as if they are looking for a reason, left, right and center primarily, to go after the Iranian and the Iranian regime in particular. Though the Iranians have also condemned and they have said that this is something which we haven't done and we are not even responsible for it. But whatever is happening out there in that part of the world, sir, maybe for the own reasons, the Americans have started blaming the Iranians, and especially the current government. And now the most important part is that Trump says that this is not a warning, this is a threat. The Iranians are going to pay a big price. Let's elaborate, sir.
Well, you have rightly pointed out the situation was that Americans have been building pressure on Iran ever since President Trump announced withdrawal from the nuclear deal called Joint Comprehensive Program of Action. Since then, I mean, onwards, the U.S. has applied those sanctions, which are actually the U.S. sanctions, not the UN one. And the squeeze has been severe upon the Iranians. Now their oil supplies, which were 2.7 million barrels per day, have come down to hardly 300,000 barrels per day. So it's a big squeeze. And if you just recall that in October, demonstrations in Iraq and Lebanon, those were demonstrations where anti-Iranian slogans were raised.
Even in Iran?
Even in Iran. Then that was the subsequent.
Yeah.
And the reason was a price hike in oil prices in Iran. So, there was a buildup of pressure inside Iran also, where the demonstrators wanted that you should come out from Iraq and Syria and shed your liabilities in Iran. Because the conservative estimates are that Iran's involvement in these countries, i.e. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, and Hamas, costs Iranians almost $10 to $12 billion per annum.
Per annum?
Yes. And
for a crippling economy like Iran, that's a huge amount
still
of money.
not a crippling economy, but under pressure, severe pressure. Iran still has got around $60 billion reserves, and but those are parked outside the country. The problem is that the banks don't want to deal with the Iranian money, and that is a big squeeze on Iranian resources. And then their own generation.
And the
of
money of their individuals as well. So it is believed that the total amount could be around 200 billion US
Well,
dollars.
that I'm talking of
Yeah, I
the
understand.
government of Iran's,
Yes.
money which is stacked outside the country. But here, the American pressure, they thought that the Iranians have almost controlled the situation, and there have been reports of many hundred killings inside Iran. And there are also, Western media, especially the American media, have been quite critical that the Americans did not play the due role which was expected of them. And they did not put adequate political pressure on Iran once there was uprising inside Iran. But they easily forget that at the moment, Iranian theocracy, Iranian, mullahs, they are well entrenched in the system, and there is no direct threat to them,
the regime,
because there is no organized opposition in the country, and those who are sitting outside, they are sitting outside. So their role is quite marginalized unless it erupts like what happened in Tunisia. So in that respect, I think there are certain miscalculations on the part of the US.
Okay.
And if they think that they can bring about a regime change in Iran, it's not going to happen through peaceful means, even if it is from within the system. But if they want to impose this kind of regime change, so that would be through American intervention. But I have my doubts that United States has the patience to go to another war, because already both sides, it's a bipartisan consensus that we have to come out of the permanent war which they are in Iraq and Afghanistan. So opening a third front in the Middle East would be rather, in fact, inviting more problems.
But Ambassador, look at the assets present in the Gulf primarily, sir. The American assets, in the form of aircraft carriers, in the form of the bases, the number, they have even increased the number
But
of troops
they were
there
in
that
any
part
case,
of the region.
they were
sir.
there. I mean, American concentration is close to 60 to 70,000 in
That's
the
exactly
Middle
what my
East.
point is, sir.
Middle East, it's not the new one. It is already there, even soon after the Kuwait war, and they have not withdrawn. But now the demand is that it is onerous on their resources. For instance, Afghanistan war is has cost them so far $1 trillion. Iraq almost double that. And then what are they getting in return? That is also very important. And then in Syria, why did they have to withdraw? So they had to withdraw and there was a bipartisan consensus on withdrawal from Syria also. So we have to look at it from that perspective also, that in the American establishment, how it is thinking, and how the American political side is thinking about their liabilities in the Middle East, especially when now United States is a net exporter of oil. It was earlier in the 50 years ago or then onwards till Saddam Hussein captured Kuwait, and it was the oil politics. But now oil itself, I think, is losing its importance and its value the way it was during the Cold War.
Especially once
during the Cold War.
this shell technology was introduced in USA.
That is another alternate.
Yeah.
But even American own resources, they are so massive that they have now become a net exporter.
So primarily, the reserves of oil or energy resources do not matter much. It's the strategic location they are basically controlling.
That is debatable. I think when as we proceed,
I'll definitely move on. So
yes.
now, Jan Saab, first of all, your comment on the threat of the Americans, sir, because ever since Donald Trump came into power, sir, the relationship between Iran and USA has really deteriorated. If you look at post P5+1, we all thought that issues have been sorted out. Iran is going to eventually come up with its true strength. But once Obama was off, Donald Trump came in, there was an absolute U-turn. And ever since then, Iran has been either under extreme sanctions or they've been hearing these threats. A lot of analysts do believe that, well, before the elections, Trump is not going to attack Iran, or they can't open up, or they can't afford to open up another front. Primarily, sir, is this just a mere threat, or you see something happening in the Middle East, in particular regarding the Iran's context?
So if we look at post-1979, Iran has been the most favorite punching bag for any American president, starting with Carter, Reagan, Bush, and all others. These threats are not new. Obama and the presidents, if we go before him, always indulged in language which always sounded something like, all options are on the table, including the military option.
Yes.
Even the very Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action deal, JCPOA, that we talk about, even that was a control mechanism. That deal ensured that Iran will not be able to have nuclear weapons. So, of course, when Trump came in the office, he literally ripped apart that whole deal, and which is called the Iran deal also, and caused all this. But again, we should also pay attention to what Trump said. The tweet that he mentioned, the tweet that he sent out said, this is not a warning, it is a threat.
Yes.
He used the word threat. And at the same time, the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, keeps reminding the Iraqi government that they have to protect the American personnel, embassy personnel, because of the Vienna Convention. Well, guess what? There's a larger treaty than the Vienna Convention called the United Nations. That the Article 2.4 of the United Nations Charter says you cannot threaten another sovereign country. And Trump precisely threatened Iran.
Unfortunate part is, sir, because the Americans, they've always believed whatever they say or they do is absolutely correct. Nobody can challenge that. But on the other hand, when you look at it from another perspective, I mean, it's a different ball game.
Exactly.
They can kill civilians. They can bomb left, right, and center. You remember what happened in Benghazi?
Yes.
When Hillary Clinton was the
What difference
Secretary
does
of
it
State?
make, she
Exactly.
said?
The way their ambassador was killed, who is supposed to be held responsible? The American government itself.
It's exactly.
The lady is to be blamed for that. Sir, if you allow me, we'll just take a short break here, Dr. Saab, and after the break, we'll return, and then I want you to answer that. We'll take a short break here. Stay with us.
And news just in, Prime Minister Imran Khan paid a surprise visit to Terlai shelter home. He inspected various departments of the shelter home and also interacted with the people there. The Prime Minister expressed satisfaction over the provision of facilities at the Terlai shelter home. He also inquired about the facilities from the people present at the shelter home. Prime Minister Imran Khan has paid a surprise visit at the shelter home in Terlai. He has also inspected various departments of the shelter home and inquired from the people there about the facilities being provided to them. Prime Minister Imran Khan has expressed satisfaction over the facilities that have been provided at this shelter home. The Prime Minister has paid a surprise visit to the Terlai shelter home and expressed satisfaction with the provision of facilities there. We'll keep updating you as more news comes in. Keep watching PTV World.
Welcome back. Now, Jansa, before I move on to Dr. Saab, there's a very interesting statement I was just going through. It says, Iran has orchestrated this attack on the US embassy. This is what the American... Now, what I would like to ask you is that, sir, you're talking about attacks on civilian areas by the Americans through those missiles, and they claim that so many insurgents or so many militants were killed or so many terrorists eventually end up losing their life, or, you know, generally. And they'll give you a number. Now, God knows what the exact number is, how many people got injured, what exactly is the current situation. Nobody talks about that. But, sir, even a single American, if you remember, one single soldier got killed in Afghanistan, and the whole process of the peace process, the dialogue process between the Afghan Taliban and the US, that almost it was over. But, sir, killing the Muslims, I'm not saying Muslims or Christians, anybody, but somebody from another country, in dozens and dozens, rather I would say millions now, millions of people have been killed by the Americans, maybe more than that. But the moment something happens, one private civilian contractor got killed and they are planning to threat the whole world. Now, sir, we haven't heard any sort of a supporting statement coming from the top leaders of the world. So even those who are on the other side of the American phenomena, sir.
So the most interesting aspect of this news is that if you read all the publications, including the New York Times or the Washington Post, they keep saying that the civilian contractor that was killed was an American. The interesting thing is, when such contractors kill other people, the US government quickly rushes and says he was not working for the United States government and he was a private employee, we are not connected with him. They just quickly claim plausible deniability. But when he is killed by someone who happened
by a mob, angry mob,
by a mob of that country that they're occupying, by the way, then all support is given to that civilian contractor who would have been, not claimed had he killed someone, as I said. So So that's interesting that when, and also one American contractor was killed, and the disproportionate attack that the United States unleashed was in two different countries, in Syria and Iraq, killing, according to the reports, 25 people, 25 members of Kataib Hezbollah, which means Hezbollah brigades. Notice that that's a different organization than the Hezbollah in Lebanon. So these 25 people were killed in retaliation for one American killed, who was a contractor working for a private company, wasn't probably representing the United States government's interests. So when those people came out protesting, the New York Times and Washington Post, very interestingly yesterday, said it was so reminiscent of what happened in 1979, the US Embassy in Tehran, and what happened in 2012, as you just mentioned, Faisal. The interesting thing is, these things keep happening because of what you are doing there. If you want to
This
stop
is a reaction.
violence,
This is the retaliatory approach, basically.
aggression creates terrorism and violence. If you want to get rid of terrorism and violence, stop the aggression. It's a very simple math. It's a very simple calculus. You don't stop aggression, you keep killing people, and then when they retaliate, you call them terrorists and all kinds of different names. So that's the very hypocritical aspect of all this. Reporting even. Forget about what the government of the United States is saying. Even if you look at the publications from England, you know, The Guardian, the New York Times, the Washington Post, they all sound as if it's written by the...
So the top media, the most
Exactly.
watched channels, the most read newspapers and the magazines, they are in their direct control.
mouthpieces of the U.S.
That's what
government.
I'm saying. That's
what
how they
are.
rule, yeah.
So I mean, it's interesting that you know, you kill people, and when people retaliate, so it's not okay. And Iran, as I was mentioning, there was actually a very interesting report. I just want to mention that 2 or 3 days ago, the New York Times had a very detailed report. It was about 1979 taking over of the embassy in Tehran. We have read so much about it. We have watched so many movies, Argo and many others. But this is a secret report that now has officially come out. Chase Bank of the United States, you know, JP Morgan Chase is probably the biggest bank of the United States, Rockefeller and all that. They were heavily involved in making sure that the hostages taken by the Ayatollahs in Iran, the 52 American hostages who were kept for 444 days in Iran, JP Morgan Chase was trying so hard to keep those people there and not release them so that Carter could lose the election and Reagan would win, and then there would be an attack on Iran. I mean, that was quite mind-boggling to read all that in the New York Times. So as you mentioned that...
So everything was done
It's all
by
for
design.
money. They had their billions of dollars were at stake.
So they wanted
they
Carter to
convinced-
go, they wanted
And the same
Ronald
is
Reagan to
happening now.
come in.
Once past is prologue, the same is happening now. There are other oil
And plus they had other ideas in their minds, especially regarding the Afghan war with the Soviet
and they
Union.
do not want to allow the Russians any territory in the Middle East. You know, so
Absolutely,
that's why they have to.
absolutely. So they had
Israel
multiple-
is also hijacking the U.S. foreign policy. John Mearsheimer, Stephen Walt wrote a very good book about that, and so that's why that's the only way to explain this sadistic urge
There
for
go.
Iran.
Dr. Saab, since you are a professor of international relations, Dr. Saab, Iraq, whatever I have studied about Iraq, I'm sure you will second me, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that Iraq was one of the better developed countries in the Middle East. Their infrastructure was probably, if not the best, among the top. No matter what we say or what we hear through the Western media about Saddam Hussein, maybe he had issues with the Kurds, but what I'm saying is primarily this man gave a system which we call the social welfare state. And that was the way it was in Iraq at that time. Eventually what happened in Kuwait, and now look at the condition of Iraq, sir. Millions of people have been killed by absolute bombing of the Americans. I still remember the day Baghdad was attacked, that famous statement that the skies of Baghdad are illuminating. Remember, sir? And we were stunned to see what was happening out there. And eventually we got to know through the American president, he did not accept it openly, but Mr. Blair, that was our mistake. Despite the fact that more than 1 million people marched in UK, nobody listened to them, nobody heard what they were trying to say. Eventually, we all saw. There were no weapons of mass destruction. Even Colin Powell, the Secretary of State at that time, had to resign. Not only resign, eventually left that party. Sir.
No, I think that if you narrate all these things, this makes a sense. Whether it's Iraq, whether it's Libya, whether it's Iran, whether you can say other Middle Eastern countries where you have these kind of dictatorship or authoritarian regimes, they contributed in the development of that state. Even if you see in the case of Iranians, we have an authoritarian system there, but they have a different economic system. So having said this, if you see about, as you are referring about the Americans' invasion in 2003, I still recall a decade back, I'm talking about 2008 or 9, I was lecturing in the NATO school and there were Iraqi brigadiers, senior officials, which were NATO brought there for a lecture. And I just mentioned Operation Iraqi Freedom, which was the term was coined for that operation of 2003, and they started protesting. In the NATO school, they protested. They said
that you're not supposed to talk about it.
No, they said, these Iraqi officers said that it was not Operation Iraqi Freedom, it was Operation Iraqi Occupation. I'm talking about that. It was exactly almost 10, 11 years back. Now, if you see today, as the New York Times was also writing the same thing, and if you see other writings, what is there? Instead of, they are saying, or anti-American slogans were heard. And they asked their parliament that either you have to ask them to leave our territory or we are going to demonstrate. So this is a very revealing that in the Iraqi people, Iraqi officials, they are not talking about that Americans should leave. Now in here, if we can connect it with the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is that if you see in the 2018, the DOD of the United States revealed its defense, you can say, paper. In that defense vision, what they said that the primary threat is China and Russia, and the terrorism was secondary. And today, if you see what the Trump was saying, it again reflects that the primary threat is terrorism to the United States. Whether they are terrorists or not, it's another way of looking. But here, two points which one has to not forget. One is it's an established, you can say, theory that violence breeds the violence. And Iraq is a violent society because in the last, you can say, 2 decades, there was a violence.
But even 90 onward till this is 2020 now, so
I'm
30
just
years.
Where the Americans are directly involved. Agreed in 93 onward, United Nations Special Commission, they were, you can say, indirectly making the Saddam Hussein weak as they are now adopting
So this
sanctions.
Operation Desert Storm took place in 1991. Yeah.
So in that case, but in the case of Iraq, Americans adopted a very systematic policy. For 1 decade, they weakened the Iraqi system, Iraqi forces, by sanctions, by other things. And then ultimately when they entered in the Iraq, it was just Iraqi forces were just wood eaten by worm. Now here, they're trying the same policy against Iran, but they're failing.
And what's the reason for that, Dr. Saab?
Because they came up with the sanctions. As ambassadors have pointed out some figure, if you just keep those figures in mind, it means that Iranians reserves, despite all those sanctions, till 2015. And then after the 2015, again, there was some 1 year or 1.5 years, there was a relief, and again there was but still Iran is a very homogeneous society. Iran has a better, you can say, way of looking. And then when you are looking about the Trump, frankly speaking, his all tweets, his all threats, they are more rhetorics. And it has been proven.
Seriously, Dr. Saab?
They have been
It's
proven.
just a mere threat.
No, it has been proven. Look what has been started. He started threatening North Korea, and where he ended up. He started threatening Iran, and then we read in the newspapers or in the different American, you can say, writing, when the Trump administration was trying that the Ayatollahs should be direct in a dialogue with the Americans. They refused it. So Iran is differently, and these all threats are simply, and everyone knows in this election year, you can say Americans commit more forces? And then Trump go for an election when his entire focus is withdrawal. So it's an entirely different situation in this changing, you can say, environment, a global strategic environment and a new realignment and everything. This time the Americans are betting, for example, in the Asia, where is the bigger, you can say, ally is India. In the case of India, India is striking for, or you can say, doing its best to maintain its strategic, what we call it, autonomy. It's another thing because of the internal issues. Now, Prime Minister Modi is compromising on certain issues on their state, but at the same time, they are trying to maintain it. So in this changing environment, my understanding is that American foreign policy, foreign and strategic policy is a, you can say, reflection, if you just focus on today's development in the Middle East, especially keeping in mind Iraq and Iran, what we find it is a full of complexities, full of confusion. It seems a directionless sort of thing. They make one statement and the next day they are going to do the different thing. And within the Middle East, what are their allies situation? For example, Saudis, they can't come up now. For example, Israel has its own limitation. So in that context, the American has to realize, sooner it's better, that their time of supremacy or their, you can say, decisive, or their time in which they were able to play a decisive role in the Middle Eastern politics, especially in these countries, Arab world, I think that is very much declined. And they have to live with this decline if they have to chalk out their new strategy. But they are unfortunately still, they are old schools, they are still living with it, that no, they can manage it. Look, they are just promising that they are going to add more special forces from 82, whatever.
You think that is going to make any difference? I don't think so.
754 troops
What
make any
difference will they
Nothing.
make against 60,000 present already in the...
Nothing. So we have to be, and then these contractors issue. This contractors issue is, if you see when the Americans were withdrawing in 2008, Blackwater or these kind of the organizations has around 400,000 plus troops there, which were contractors. Now, they were not taking their responsibility, whatever they were doing. But now if you, as you pointed out yourself, if one contractor was killed 2-3 days back and they raided, and what the Iraqis are saying, that they raided on our sovereignty. Now, this is a point that a state in which a regime is, you can say, in power because of the American blessing, a state in which there are a lot of, you can say, they have in the last 2 decades investment, and there they are saying that you are hitting our sovereignty. I think these are the issues which the American has to take very seriously.
They should.
And now the problem in this context is that if they can do anything, are they capable to doing this? For instance,
do you think so, this threat of Trump should be taken seriously?
I think that one cannot ignore these kind of the threats, especially coming from a big power, because the big power has always, you can say in such a situation, they make a bigger mistakes. And their bigger mistakes for us is our worst mistakes. But on the other side, if we review the 4 years or 3 years Trump's presidency, I think this is a mere rhetoric.
All right. Now, Ambassador, if you remember, recently, about 2 days ago, there was this very interesting news that Iran is doing this naval exercise, a joint naval exercise with the Russians and the Chinese, and that also in the Indian Ocean, in this part of the sea. At the same time, sir, there's a lot of American presence there. I've also read that the Japanese are also sending their troops to look after their own, I would say, to look after and safeguard their own interest, primarily. Now, sir, in certain circumstances, the ongoing, Iran is not Iraq, as mentioned by Dr. Saab, sir. Iran is a big country, much larger country than Iraq. People are devoted. Though there are economic issues, there are problems, there are a lot of sanctions, but still they have the will to come out of that. Whatever they were promised by the Americans took a U-turn, nothing has been done. Now, in certain circumstances, what sort of choices do you think Khamenei or his regime has, sir?
Well, they are in a difficult situation, there's no doubt about it. But at the same time, as Professor Jaspal has stated, that Americans, they are not going to commit their troops in Iran, say if they intend any military action. This is, I won't subscribe to the idea, reason being that the American patience is limited as far as now committing more troops are concerned. They are already thinking of withdrawing from Afghanistan. So, and then their withdrawal from Syria itself with a lot of criticism from the Middle Eastern states, but they withdrew from Syria. Same is true, but here in Iraq in particular, you have to look at it that Iraq of late has been trying to assert its sovereignty. There have been criticism from the Americans against the regime in Iraq, but at the same time, this Iraqi regime had also been maintaining a distance from Iran. they wanted to be part of the pan-Arabism rather than run their affairs on sectarian grounds. So these were the developments which were taking place. But at the same time, the cost of living in the country, and because the Americans have imposed those costs on Iraq. And when you talk about these American contractors, they are actually sharks in any system. Even in Afghanistan, 80% of the American money has been taken back by the American contractors. I'm not saying this. These Special Inspector General Cigars reports. It's critical of that, and it has been also revealed in the Washington Post documents. So this is something, I think this is an issue where its expiry date has come as far as Iraq is concerned, or as far as American commitment in the Middle East is concerned. With regard to Iran, Iran has you can say, a disciplined armed forces. They are committed, and if they are attacked, I think they will retaliate.
Sir, their armed forces are primarily regarded as terrorists by the Americans. So they will find some sort of a legitimate reason to attack them.
They call Taliban as terrorists, but now they are negotiating and they are equal interlocutors. So these change. Yasser Arafat was a terrorist once upon a time, and then he was given a Nobel Prize. And so these political terminologies change with the passage of time and with the passage of certain phases in the political arena, which nation states they have to grapple with. So I would not be surprised that tomorrow, if there could be a situation whereby Americans would be negotiating with the Iranian clergy. It's not far off. One thing is for sure, that Americans will have to shun their wish list regarding regime change. If they can guarantee that, then I think Iranian clergy would be ready to negotiate.
Do you think
so
sir, Iran is primarily ready for this change? Because when we see these protests in Iran taking place, or Iraq for that matter, I think more than 200 people, 204 to be exact, this was the number quoted by some news agencies. This was the number killed in Iraq?
Amnesty International, they said more than 400 in Iraq.
Iraq, 204 in Iran.
Well, again, Amnesty International, if that's, but that has been disputed in a sense that there have been more casualties. This is, we are talking about 100 plus only in one city.
Internet was shut down, you couldn't get any reports.
Yes, that is still under control, and so it is there. But we have to be mindful of the fact that Iran is a different ball game in the Middle East as compared to other Middle Eastern states are concerned. So therefore, Americans will be careful. If they'll be more careful than what they did in Iraq, because Iraq was a war of choice, which they did, and the whole world called it as occupation. It was not.
It was an absolute occupation, sir.
So it did not enjoy the UN sanctions. But here in Iran, and especially when America has discredited itself after withdrawing from the nuclear deal, I think the United States...
Whose credibility was lost?
Americans.
Americans, exactly. That's what my point is. Now, moving on to you, Jan Saab. Couple of quick comments on the issue of Middle East. If you remember, sir, when Iraq was attacked by the Americans, we all witnessed what happened to Iraq. I mean, their infrastructure was destroyed like anything, and people thought that the Americans are primarily testing their new weapons in an environment where they can do anything they want to do. The number of people killed, what is currently the status of Iraq, we all know, sir. Rather, the whole Middle East, wherever the Americans have gone, they have only one thing they've done, that is destruction, absolute destruction and killing. Now in the Middle East, sir, there were tensions between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which still exist, but Pakistan was given a role, and a lot of people believe that maybe on the best of the Americans, that the Prime Minister went and tried to diffuse the situation. We do not know what exactly is happening on that regard, but at least these statements coming from Iran or Saudi Arabia against each other, they have gone down significantly. Now, sir, in this case, in this particular case, when you're talking about the regime change, or you're talking about some more sanctions, or maybe some areas might get hit by the American missiles in the future. You never know. The consequences for the region, and in particular, Pakistan, sir.
Well, the odds are against peace. Here's the thing: Trump, as we have seen so far, as was mentioned, he threatens people. He tweets out threats, but then he backs off from them. He threatened North Korea. He threatened Iran. He, in a subtle way, threatened Pakistan. He said Pakistan is not giving us results, and we've been paying them billions of dollars. And then he backed off from that too. He creates.
There was an immediate response from Imran Khan.
Exactly, and so he creates this crisis situation, and then he backs off from them just to claim credit that he averted a crisis. And the 750 soldiers that we mentioned that have been deployed now, they've been dispatched to Kuwait actually. Even that is just to claim credit. Later on he might withdraw them back and say, I brought back soldiers, brought them back home. So it is just to, because the election campaign season is about to start. At the same time, please let's not forget, the impeachment trial is about to begin also in the United States after the Congress.
But that won't make any difference, if you all know.
It won't make any difference, but it allows a good distraction. Iran situation, Iran crisis. I don't think Trump is going to attack. It was rightly mentioned that America doesn't have the appetite to go to wars and invade countries after countries, especially in the Middle East. But some level of hostility will continue because Israeli lobbies in Washington, D.C. are always active in ensuring that Iran will be a country that will be hated and disliked by those who matter in the United States. So I don't see a very beautiful year for peace ahead. It's a new year, and we saw the new year started with a very with bad news coming from all corners. So peace is not going to return to the Middle East. Peace is not going to return in the U.S. foreign policy. But I also do not see that a full-scale war will happen between Iran and the United States.
Certain targeted areas.
Yes, the drones are always there. The drone bases are definitely there in Djibouti, in Qatar, in.
What if Iran retaliates?
They will retaliate. They brought
shot down the drone. This is what
brought
Trump
down
says.
the U.S. drone. Yeah, just this summer. So that will happen. They have these fast-moving boats in the Strait of Hormuz.
And I've heard there are like thousands and thousands of them.
Exactly, and they threaten and they show some retaliation, some sort of,
And we've
they
also
send a-
heard that they
send a
have
message.
the anti-ship missiles on them, sir. Those small boats carrying. So they have.
And those are
this is the
aggressive
indigenous.
Yeah. So I mean, those are aggressive weapons and those are aggressive moves, but let's hope that, a war, a full-scale.
Iran is not a piece of cake for
It's
USA,
not.
sir. Dr. Saab?
This is very important, that if you see that Americans tried to blackmail the Iranians first time, we have seen that they have, you can say, state organ of the state or armed forces. They declared terrorist organization when they declared the Iranians special guards or these guys, sort of thing. But after that, we have only heard when they shot their drone, they say what they were saying, that bolt and lock or something like that. And after that, again, Iranians captured their ships. And even recently, we have read what the British were dealing with it. So Iranians' geostrategic location is such as that which is very advantageous for them. And at this stage, as you very rightly pointed out, that
Despite the fact that so many top-of-the-line modern assets of Navy are present in the region, sir?
No, even not. If you say, look what the Iranian strategy is. Their strategy is some kind of akin to the kamikazes. If these small ships are just going inside and they are going for a suicidal mission, so how the aircraft carrier, how it protect itself. So it's not easy for the Americans to initiate a conflict with Iran. And secondly, Strait of Hormuz is that a place where if the conflict started, the economy of the Europe, economy of the other countries, where it will be destabilized. And then the most important thing which we cannot forget, now Iranians are not alone. With them, who are doing the exercises?
Chinese and the Russians.
Chinese and the Russians. And the Chinese and Russians are
Do you think
already saying...
Sir, is that a message for the Americans?
That's a big
or
message.
the allied troops there?
No, they have to. It's a very strong message. If you see the Russians intervene in Syria, why? Because the Russians have only, out of the Russia, there are
That's the exit for the Russians.
No, so this is it. And then the Americans, when they stopped, you can say, supporting the Kurds, and I think that was a big negative message about the Americans towards their friends. So within the region, I think nobody will be ready to commit anything for the Americans now. And that is a difficult time. But the problem with us is that if there is anything happen there, it has a spillover impact on the entire region. And I think that if we can go with the Americans, I'm not an economist, but my understanding is that the Americans destroy the country, and then the contractors in the name of the building started using the same, and then they say the American money is coming and it's remain in the Washington, 60% or 80% never move from it, and as a result the state will be in the debt.
Because those are the payments for the contractors,
Yeah,
right,
so
sir?
it's a cycle.
That's the consultancy
And
fee.
this
as
is a
they call it.
cycle which they try. Even in the Afghanistan, it was very interesting when at the peak of the war, Emirates has started expanding its business class because the contractors were traveling there in a war-torn country. So the world is now realizing, and the balancers are there. So definitely this time for the Americans, whatever they are saying, it's a tough time for them.
It's not that easy,
Yeah.
the way they think. Anyway, Dr. Saab, thank you very much. The answer was a pleasure. Thank you so much, Ambassador Saab. And that's all we have for this half. I'll see you tomorrow, inshallah. Till then, you take good care. Khuda Hafiz.